Seta.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I know we've had a wonderful lunch. You had a wonderful direct session after lunch. So you should be wide awake, alert, enthusiastic, in my opinion. For our next session, we have Beta Antikilian. Hopefully I got it right. I'm not always good with pronunciation. Here with us today talking about humanizing technology and the power of story. My name's Mary and I will be your conference moderator. I am here pretty much in the background unless you need me. If you have any technical questions, please let me know. I like Cornell's response, post-lunch humans. So as you've seen in the chat, I'll post it again. Just welcoming you to this session. If you would like to receive professional learning credit and or college credit, however they pitched it to you, please complete the link. It also lets us know that you're here and how many and things of that nature for ourselves. I will be quiet and I'm going to pass it on over.
Hi there. Thank you, Mary. Yes, my name is Seta. I'm happy to be joining you today. I am coming on from Los Angeles, specifically representing USC Shoah Foundation. So today I'll tell you a little bit more about specifically what we do at USC Shoah Foundation, how we utilize the power of story and humanize story through different modes of technology, and most specifically through our most newest innovative resource, Dimensions in Testimony. So I'm going to go ahead and just start sharing my PowerPoint. I'm going to go ahead from my current slide, make sure I got my presentation shared. Can you all see my presentation in full screen? All right.
Looks good.
Nodding heads. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and just share that specifically what I hope you get out of today's really quick session is to really understand the value of teaching with testimony as a tool for developing digital literacy in students, and really being able to understand how to access our Dimensions in Testimony resource on our website for educators and students, Eyewitness. Also be able to take away different strategies for how you can integrate this resource across the curriculum. And also want to familiarize you with the different teacher functions in Eyewitness that can help you create a virtual classroom, and which is a way that you can actually assign a resource that we have within our site to students. So all that will make a lot more sense in just a few more moments. But I'll go ahead and just ask if you can quickly give me just a general understanding of who you are, specifically where you teach, what subjects or grades you teach. Please drop that note in the chat. It gives me an opportunity to understand what types of disciplines we have represented with us today. And as you're sharing a bit more about you, I'll share a little bit about me. I have been with USC Shoah Foundation for about over 5 years now. Specifically, my role is that of a learning and development specialist. So I do create educational material that specifically utilize testimony from our collection of genocide survivors, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. My background is classroom education. I have also been a museum educator, as well as project-based learning and online learning teacher as well. So I have been all over the place. Oh, hello there, Pam. I see you there. I see we have English teachers. We have dramatic arts teachers, English, film studies, computer. Oh, wow. We definitely have many across the disciplines here today. And so definitely excited to hear how you all will be sharing how this resource could be useful for you, specifically in your class. So I'll go ahead and continue my presentation here by telling you a little bit about USC Shoah Foundation itself. So our mission is to develop empathy, understanding, and respect through testimony. And we have been in this work since about 1994, specifically when USC Shoah Foundation was, before it was USC Shoah Foundation, Survivors of the Shoah, specifically founded by Steven Spielberg, right just after he produced Schindler's List, and that's where he had this concept and idea to specifically go around the world to interview Holocaust survivors, specifically so that their stories could last in perpetuity. And so in that, he then, after about almost a decade, he partnered with USC in order for these testimonies that he had collected on tapes to become digitized and accessible in an archive. And today the archive is digitally available through the Visual History Archive. Specifically, in 2006, that's when the name became USC Shoah Foundation, under which this archive exists, and does contain about 55,000 testimonies of varied survivors from across the 20th century. And unfortunately, still, we do have genocide that continues. However, we do actually collect stories as much as best we can, and we do have contemporary examples of anti-Semitism, of individuals who have survived anti-Semitism and can share about these experiences, as well as survivors of the Rohingya anti-mass violence in our collection. However, I do want to say we do regard testimony as a primary source, an authentication of a person's story, their account that can serve as evidence. Although survivors tell their story much later than when they did experience that which occurred to them, their story is still authentic and valid to them. And of course, we do stress that it is always important to corroborate and to encourage students to corroborate sources, not only using testimony as one source to help understand the past, but also use many different types of sources to help that with historiography. And so if you have any questions, do please feel free to drop those into the chat. But I know time is valuable today, and I do want to get to share the dimensions and testimony and the history about this type of testimony that we have collected and added to sort of our collection of testimonies. So I'm going to go ahead and actually, before telling you a little bit more, show you a specific video here to tell you a little bit more about our dimensions and testimony technology. And then we can get into talking a little bit more specifically about the value of this tool to develop students' digital literacy. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. And let me share my sound. Great.
The Holocaust is an undeniable and horrific chapter in human history in which 6 million Jews and countless millions perished in genocide and crimes against humanity during the Second World War. Dimensions and Testimony is a new format of interview by which you can ask your questions of a Holocaust survivor who has videotaped answers to many questions, so that the questions that you have will be answered directly in person, life-size and 3D.
What was life like before the war?
I had a very happy childhood. I loved to be together with my family.
We understand very well the power of conversation between Holocaust survivors and the younger generation. We've seen it in our schools, we've seen it in our universities. That conversation, that moment of dialogue where I ask my question and I get it answered, is just it's magic in the room when that happens. And we wanted to try and find a way to preserve that as best possible. What's wonderful about conversing with these Holocaust survivors in this interactive form is that it's about you. about what you want to know. Conversation allows you to learn in a way that most suits your interest. And that's where the deepest learning takes place.
Do you feel hope for the future?
I always feel hopeful. If I wasn't hopeful, I wouldn't be talking to you or anybody else about my experiences.
I'm very happy that I was able to survive.
And here I am. I was one of the lucky ones.
The questions that students have is what's driving the learning experience. And so we know that this is important because we're going to enable them to be able to learn through their own curiosity. We are almost out of time to have deep conversations with Holocaust survivors. If we don't have these conversations now, they will never take place.
All right. See if there's any questions. Okay. So just to back up a bit, just before, in case I wasn't clear, I did want to express that our visual history archive contains, of course, various survivor experiences that, and as you could see here from this list, there are experiences of Armenian genocide survivors, Cambodian genocide survivors, Tutsi survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And these are all video recorded, audio-visual recorded testimonies. In about 2014 is when we first piloted this dimensions and testimony technology. And as you can see in the image, and as you heard in the video, what this technology makes, or how this technology was able to capture the story in an innovative, different way, is that the survivors over a period of 5 days were asked over 1,000 questions, and they were recorded in a 360 manner in order to capture their physical movements, their the body language at which when they are expressing their story. And so these videos, or these interactive biographies, as we like to call them, are pre-recorded videos of answers to different types of questions that they were asked. And Dimensions in Testimony then makes the opportunity available for anyone to ask questions to a particular survivor. So they themselves, you would become the interviewer, students become the interviewer, and you are in charge of asking the questions based on your own interests. And so in this way, Dimensions in Testimony allows students to really deepen their inquiry, their understand, what it is that's of interest to them, and to have a type of conversation with the survivor in particular. So these questions that they ask are, of course, then relevant to them and what they feel they would like to gain understanding for. And so how does this connect to digital literacy? So digital literacy, specifically in itself, really helps students to really understand how to read and understand what is true, what is not true, and sort of that information that they find online or available through the different resources that they have, that they find access to in this digital era in which we're living, right? And so being able to weed out that false information, right, takes skill. It takes that critical thinking capacity in order to really understand what it is that they could separate from what is not true in that sense. And so how they can break down different stereotypes based on what they feel is right. And so in that case, digital literacy helps students to really find the value of not just reading something at face value, but being able to really think more deeply about what it means, but also to be able to say, hey, let me ask why, or let me try to dig for more information to help me really understand whether this is true in which they're reading. And so how they can really use dimensions in testimony to develop this digital literacy is to really help that opportunity for them to engage with technology in a way that would really help them to break down their stereotypes, to really deepen their values and ideologies that they may have about the future, about what they're thinking in the current moment. And so before I continue, I'd like to also pose this question of how you might see testimony playing a role to deepen and develop digital literacy, specifically how you think testimony can do this. And if you have been using testimony before, you have used testimony from Eyewitness, I'd love to hear that as well. You please feel free to share. Or if this is your first time ever hearing about USC Shoah Foundation, I'd love to hear that as well. You can drop that note in the chat. Thank you, Dave. I see you say testimony can make learning more personal.
I think for younger children who've never been around any genocide survivors, it's great for them to see them and speak to them almost in real time, although it's not.
Yes, thank you. Right, it gives them that chance to really engage with testimony with a survivor, and gives them empowers them and their interests. Just reading the chat here. They bring the real past into the present. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, and it seems amazing to have these personal connections that help students connect with the content. All right. So keep sharing in the chat, and I'll continue forward with just sharing with you a little bit before I show you a little bit more about the Dimensions in Testimony resource itself, and we go on to Eyewitness, in which we will do in just a moment. I do want to give you a little bit of background specifically on how we approach the use of testimony. Again, we see testimony as a primary source that really does bring the human face, give a human face to the past, and really not only helps students learn about history in particular or the past, but it really helps them to really learn different types of literacy, not only digital, but also emotional literacy, historical literacy, to really be able to recognize a person's emotions as they speak, their tone of voice, through their body language. So all of this really does help to paint a big picture and connection to an individual as they tell their story. And if they can practice this and do this with testimony, it can only help to develop this empathy and this ability to deepen their human connection with other individuals in their class. And so we see, again, we see testimony as being a universal source to develop students the standards, that foundational standards that we hope that students will gain, such as critical thinking capacities, social emotional capacities, really broaden their and deepen their historical understanding, but also multiple types of literacy. And ultimately, testimony has the power to create motivational change in students. And that's what we really seek with testimony, is for them to really deepen their understanding for what it means to be responsible contributors to society, and what it means for them to be a part of that. What is their role in society, and how can they create change? Understanding and learning from what has happened in the past. And we do consider and bring in the theory of constructivism, and where students are learning on through their own construction of meaning. We also consider critical theory, which does allow for students whose voices have not been who have been marginalized or minoritized or underrepresented to really be represented through these various stories, and for them to understand that their stories are also valid. And so with that, I want to go ahead and share with you our educational website, which is Eyewitness. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in the link for you all to follow along with me. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to eyewitness.usc.edu in just a moment. But I do want to share that our educational website, separate from our main USC Shoah Foundation website, really is student friendly, educator friendly. It is a global website. So at this moment, there are about over 200,000 users from 92 different countries who are accessing the testimonies that we make available and the activities we make available on our site. You'll see here this number 3,600. That's the number of testimonies that we have in Eyewitness from the 55,000 that I shared with you in our visual history archive. And these testimonies are accessible in their full length. However, we also have testimonies that are curated into particular clips of testimony that are available on our watch page. And in a moment, I'll share with you our watch page where you can download particular clips of testimony and play those for students and pair them with graphic organizers. You'll also be able to search through Eyewitness for different types of testimony or of topics that you're really thinking of bringing in if you don't already find them available on our watch page. We also have an activities library of ready-to-use resources that are student-facing and that can be assigned to students in a virtual classroom. And our educators resources page is another place which you could access testimony, specifically our dimensions in testimony technology, and that is on our educator resource page. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in one more link for you before I navigate on. And in order for me to do that, I just need to grab my link, stop my screen share for a moment, grab my link, drop in the Google chat, my Google Classroom link or Drive link for you. All right, and so in the Google Drive, you'll find that there's a handout that says Educator Quick Tips. So as I navigate on and you want to go ahead and create an account, you are welcome to. Accounts are at no cost. So our website is free, free accessible. Registration does support you to have all the full benefits of downloading materials, assigning activities to students. You can still access dimensions and testimony without registration. However, if you are interested in assigning activities, you can go ahead and create an account, and your students you can bring your students into Eyewitness by providing them with a key code that you would make once you make a student group. So I will come back to this in a bit, but I wanted to tell you that it exists if you are interested in creating an account as of right now. But I'm going to go ahead and go on and navigate onto Eyewitness just to show you our site. So if I start off with eyewitness.usc.edu, I'm going to go ahead and share, just briefly give you a glimpse of our watch page. As I mentioned, This page in particular allows you to browse various different topics that are historically specific, but also universal in their themes. So for example, here, you'll see perpetrators is highlighted. So this is universal to the many different experiences across the different genocides. However, you'll see there's different languages available. So you can filter on this page to English. You can browse topics if you click on browse topics, and you'll notice that there's different topics, as I said, about 100 different topics here. And these, so if I click on, let's say, education, all these survivors in this topic discuss their connection or how to education, how education played a role in their life. And these clips can be downloaded. So these clips are, here, this one is about 2 minutes, and it can be downloaded and brought in as an MP4 file in your computer, and you compare this with the graphic organizer to help students sort of understand how to cite evidence or how to read this testimony in terms of not only its the value that it provides and understanding what is the speaker speaking about, but also their emotion in which they tell their story. So this is our watch page, and we also do here have one-pagers about different genocides that are available as well. So if you'd like to see this, so if I click on, for example, the Armenian genocide, you see how it's a one-page document that provides background for the experience, a bit about the particular genocide experience itself, and background information. So this is one way, again, in which we provide extra resources for students to really understand what is the survivor speaking about, really to contextualize the testimony and to humanize these stories, to humanize them more by giving that extra background into these survivors, the life in which they were living. So our activities page, which I'll get to, but this also is where you can access our ready to use activities that can be assigned to students. But I want to go ahead and go to educator resources. Specifically, this, if I scroll down this page, dimensions and testimony is where you would want to get to in order to access our resource. And so our survivor, Pinka Scooter, you'll see here, he was the first survivor in which we used to pilot this technology in 2014. And so he's the most earliest example of our dimensions and testimony technology, which was tested and vetted in order to make sure that he was ready to be used among students. And Pinkas's dimensions and testimony is also used in museums around the world as well. We also have Eva Kor's dimensions and testimony, Max Eisen's testimony as well. And we even have a Nanjing Massacre survivors dimensions and testimony too, available in Eyewitness. But what's available to you through these different pages? So I'm going to go ahead and click on Pinka Scooter. And here, as you scroll down, you'll see his dimensions and testimony available on the screen. And what I also want to share is that we do have a biography about Pinkas, who he is. We also have more information, just kind of overview of his biographical details, and a gallery of pictures that are also connected to his past as well, available for students on this page. And we have guidelines for how to use the technology, as well as how students can use the feature as well. and you can kind of move through these different resources and a brief history about the Holocaust. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of zoom in or zoom out just a little bit to show you how the technology works. So if you're on this page and you're following along with me, in order for students to interact, what you want to and ask questions, what you do is you hold down the microphone and ask your question. An alternative way could be typing in your answer as well. And what happens is a transcript will populate here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Pinkas how he's doing today, and you'll hear his response. Pinkas, how are you today?
Not too bad.
I'm going to go ahead and ask him how his tell us a little bit about his childhood. Pinkas, can you tell us about your childhood?
Well, we were from a middle-class family, and we lived in the center of Łódź, which wasn't a small town. It was the second largest city in Poland. And I personally, except occasionally having had my payas pulled and somebody would shout, Židé do Palestiny, Jews go to Palestine, I never experienced any anti-Semitism as such in Łódź. I had a very happy childhood. My parents were winemakers. My father started teaching me to become a winemaker when I was 3.5 years old. I started school when I was 3.5 years old, and by the age of 5, I knew the Old Testament almost off by heart. And I could already read and I could already write because my mother, who went to gymnasium, she actually taught me how to read Polish. So I spoke Polish to my father, Polish to my mother, Yiddish to my father, and I became bilingual almost from birth.
So as you could see, students can ask Pinkas questions and they'll get a response from him. Is there any question that anyone online here would like to ask Pinkas? I can go ahead and ask. You can type in the chat if you'd like. And as we're thinking about this question, how could this resource be useful to students? How can you see this being an asset to materials that you already are using in the classroom to teach about this history, or even to teach particularly to help across the disciplines outside of history? What value does this bring to your classroom? Okay, Natha says, growing up, what was your favorite pastime or sport? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask. Pinkas, can you tell us about your favorite pastime or sport?
What I do for fun now is I love to watch soccer and I love to watch other sports on television. I love to walk, but most of all, and believe it or not, my greatest fun is when I can help people when they're in trouble. That's my most cherished fun that I enjoy, is helping people.
Cornell, you ask, can we ask a silly question? What kind of question would you like to ask? Let's see what happens if I ask Pinkas, who's gonna win the World Cup. Let's see what he says. Pinkas, who do you think is going to win the World Cup? Oh. Sometimes let's say if you ask questions that he just can't answer, he'll say, I don't know, or he'll direct you to something different. So for example, Pinchas, what's your favorite pizza?
I'm afraid that I cannot answer that question.
So this helps, sort of, we have embedded the ability to kind of divert questions that are unrelated, but there are certain questions that he does answer exactly. Kids can be creative, but it does help to, again, deepen their understanding that he is a person, right? And he still, they can have this interactive conversation with him. But Kristen asks, are the answers by keyword, like answering? Yes. So there are particular words that Pinchas can pick up specifically, and this will prompt certain answers to be given. However, this system was tested in order for this to happen. So over several years, these keywords were associated and tested in order for him to pick up the particular responses. So, and I just want to share now to help students with kind of understanding, guiding them into what questions they particularly can ask. I have dropped into the Google Drive, but accessible here are guidelines specifically for students on how to engage with the dimensions and testimony technology. And so here, this particular resource gives them a little bit of background about dimensions and testimony, but it also provides suggested questions that can be asked. I asked one already, how can you tell me about your childhood, or how did you survive? What is your message for us? What, can you tell us about liberation? So different aspects. These are just guiding questions that can help sort of give students some tips on how to get a conversation going with Pinchas in particular. And we do offer specific tips on how to really ask or construct meaningful questions. So that are, of course, outside of those that we've already provided. So it's very important that when you're asking and having a conversation, you must understand who is the individual who you're having a conversation with. Really find out about them before you just start asking them questions. This kind of basic understanding can help guide the conversation. Be aware of the historical context. That can also be another way in which students can really craft meaningful questions when they know the history in which of Pinchas's life. So with that, his biography would be important to share with them, and as well as the brief history of the Holocaust to help kind of give them a contextual understanding. They might want to have a particular topic that they are focused on. So giving a particular topic to them to really think about might be helpful to kind of navigate the conversation. Do you want them to specifically focus on pre-life, life before the Holocaust? Questions like his experience with anti-Semitism, or his childhood, or his family life might be questions that could be asked to understand more about his pre-life, his life during the Holocaust, right? These are different types of questions, or his life after. So breaking up the topic of focus can really help to break up the questions and not have it feel so overwhelming. But also, ideas or that they may have, just like curiosity, can help, of course, with understanding who he is. Maybe they're interested in religion, or they're interested in culture, and so they might ask Pinchas these types of questions as well to become more familiar about traditional cultural practices. Yes, and now, of course, technology is technology, and there can be times where, the system may not work, or, the sound doesn't work or whatnot. There's always that chance you could type in your answer or it could be, the bandwidth that day or whatnot, but we do have a particular help button, this question mark here. If anything is ever wrong, you could always click the help button and also send us a message as well about, yes, here we go. Can send us a message as well about what's troubling. Now, to go back to the page, I want to be able to share another tool that's available to you, and specifically one that is a ready-to-use activity. And there was a question about, do we have survivors of other genocide experiences represented in Dimensions and Testimony? For example, we do not have Armenian genocide survivors represented in the Dimensions and Testimony collection, unfortunately, because as 2014, when this technology first became available or a concept, Armenian genocide survivors were not really accessible, as they, unfortunately, many of them had passed away at that time, since the Armenian genocide 1915, or those who were around 2014 were very much older. And it is becoming, we don't currently yet have a Tutsi survivor in Dimensions and Testimony, but we do have the Nanjing Massacre survivors. And we also, I believe, are exploring what a Guatemalan genocide survivor may be like, as well as we have also interviewed liberators. So these are available, not yet in Eyewitness, but slowly they will, as they become more tested more and more, and they will become accessible in Eyewitness for students' use as well. But I want to go ahead and share, excuse me, activities with you. We do have several activities that are connected in particular to PNCUS. And when I say activity, our activities, as I mentioned, are ready to use tools that you can bring into the classroom. So for example, if I click on Conversation with PNCUS Scooter, you'll see here from the description of this activity that what they will do is that they will learn about what a conversation is and certain techniques on how to have a conversation with PNCUS, how to construct questions appropriately, and then what they could possibly do after they have now newfound knowledge, how can they apply their learning? And so in order to give you a better understanding about how our activities particularly work, I want to tell you a little bit more about our framework that we use. And that's our 4C framework here. Now, if I go back to my PowerPoint just for a second, told you about all of this. Okay. Actually, let me go back now and here. All right. So how this works is we follow a particular framework called the 4C framework. So consider, collect, construct, and communicate. Consider is the C, is the first part of an activity where students are really meant to think about what they know about a particular topic. It's where we're assessing their prior knowledge about what they know, or they're building background information about a particular topic. In this case, in this activity, what we want them to consider is particularly what does it mean to have a conversation? What does a conversation mean? And so by kind of asking them these questions, building their background on knowledge on what a conversation is, they're then ready to go forward into the next section, or the next C, which is collect, in which they are now going to gather new pieces of information to add to their knowledge, to add to their understanding of what they learned about and consider. So in this case, now they're going to kind of gather more information about how to have a conversation. And then once they've kind of gathered this new information that kind of validates what they learned in the consider section, then they're now ready to apply what they have learned in the construct section. So construct is that application of learning in a in a way that's tangible, in a way that they can apply digitally through our online activities. Or, in other activities, we have them create, musical composition or a video essay or a word cloud. So we have many different activity types that you can explore, but they all follow this 4C framework. And the last C is to communicate. Share with others what you have learned in some capacity. And now in particular, now if we go ahead and I explore with you this activity in itself, you'll see, as I mentioned, this first part builds their understanding about dimensions and testimony, about what it means to have a conversation. So they get to explore the video, they get to respond to the questions here by typing in their answers. And then they get to save their work, right? So they type their answers actually automatically save, but you can always save just as backup. And they move through and then they can go ahead to the next section. Right here now, they're learning a little bit more about Pinchas, building some background understanding about who he is in particular and his story in particular. Then they'll learn a little bit more about how to have conversations. So here in this video, they're listening to Pinchas being interviewed by someone. And what did that process of being interviewed look like? What did it feel like? So here they'll respond to these different questions. What did you notice about the way in which the questions help guide the conversation? So again, this consider section is really building their background knowledge. And here they're able to then construct their own questions. What are some things that they learned? What are some questions that they may be interested in? Collect, as I said, that place where they can start gathering information. Here they're going to gather information from Pinchas. So this is where they actually can ask Pinchas questions, the ones that from the questions that they had constructed or created in the consider section. Once they've had their conversation with Pinchas, they're going to apply what they have learned. And here we have some examples and ways which they can apply their learning. Here they can create some type of creative work. Maybe they create a song based off what they learned from Pinchas. Again, maybe they focused on his pre-life or his life during the Holocaust or his life after, or they asked several different questions, right? How do they then share what they have learned? So now they're applying their learning somehow. Here in this, bringing in that creative aspect, again, maybe they want to create Pinchas's a portrait of him, of how they perceived him when he was young, right? Here we have a personal perspective. Write a letter to Pinchas that shares what he has taught you. Or write a blog or a vlog about your experience. Or another type of way in which they can share with you through a guideline that's not specifically on here. Something that you bring in, you add on to as an option. So here, as they choose which option they would like, they can write here for notes, but then they can, of course, share that work with you in some way, how you feel it's appropriate. Now, communicate. This is an opportunity here. It says the direction is a gallery walk. So perhaps you have them share their work on Google Slides, and then they make that available on Google Classroom if you use that, and then have them walk through the Google Slides or put their projects around the room, right? Depending on how you can, construct a gallery walk, that might be useful to you. All right, so how do you assign this? So I just want to make sure that you know how to assign it, and that, oops. If I go out to activities, you'll see here that there's a students and groups tab. You want to make a group. You can call it anything you'd like. So if I say Miss Seta's class, you make a group and you get a particular key code. And this key code is one that you would share with your students, and that's what they would use to log in as a student from our registration page. So if you're interested in assigning this activity, that's something that you would do. And just to share with you what that page looks like before I take any questions and we can kind of debrief this, when you sign in, you click on register here. And for you, you would sign in as an educator and provide all this information. If you sign in as a student, and this is where they would drop in that key code. Oops. They would drop in the key code and they just create a username and a password. They don't need to share email at all. So all this, if you click on that Google link that I dropped in, you'll see the educator quick tips. You'll see a little bit more about Eyewitness in the virtual classroom. You'll also be able to see more ways in which we can use testimony in the classroom. And I dropped in those 2 guidelines here that were available on that page that I shared with you. But last note, if you are interested in any other kind of are learning more about how you can bring in the Holocaust into the classroom, we do partner with Echoes and Reflections, which offer comprehensive sort of units on the Holocaust, and of Dimensions and Testimony is complementary to this work as well. So you can learn more about Echoes here in this handout. But I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of go to the end here of my presentation and just ask if there are any questions. We do, before we go, there is going to be another upcoming webinar that tell you more about our next resource, our next Dimensions and Testimony, that of Edith Maneker, who was a kinder transport survivor. So she's next up in our list. And if you are interested in coming and hearing more, please visit and sign up for this webinar on December 7th. But before you go, I'd just love to hear from you, specifically your thoughts on how Dimensions and Testimony can be an asset in your classroom. I'd love to hear from you and how this technology you can bring in as a way to humanize testimony and technology. What thoughts do you have?
While individuals are thinking, if I can just do a couple of next steps. So in the chat, I have placed the session survey. I'm sure they would like some feedback, and so would we as well at NDE. And just a reminder of just when the next session is, but please feel free. This is a great resource. I was listening, and I've also worked with Echoes and Reflections and some of my other work and just all the things in the Shoah Foundation. So just really happy I can moderate this room. So I appreciate that. I am going to stop the recording.